Okay.
Cool. Okay, Julie, we are live.
Okay. Good morning. Hopefully people are drifting in. To start, I have a few announcements. Welcome to the second Genealogy Circle meeting of 2023. I'm Julie Saylor, a librarian in the Maryland department, and today I'll be speaking about researching your ancestors using land records. But before we do that, I do have a few announcements, and it'll give people time to drift in maybe. Because this is a virtual program, we'll be holding off on answering questions until well, actually not until the end of the presentation. We'll have a time at the end to answer questions. There will be a few times during the program that you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. I'll tell you when that is. Feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat at any time. So you can do that at any time. And again, we'll have plenty of time to address questions following the presentation. Although I won't be sharing my slides today, I do have a resource list for you. Most of this is simply links that we talk about during the program, so you don't need to stress out about writing all these links down. We're putting a link to that in the chat right now. We'll also be putting a link to the evaluation in the chat comments in a moment, and then again at the end of the program. So completes, it's really important that you complete these evaluations as we use them to plan future programs and to justify the continuation of funding for our programs. And also, I just personally appreciate it if you would take time to give comments. Even if you don't think they're positive comments, I take those in mind and use that to try to improve how I present. I want to remind you that we conduct genealogy programs on a regular basis. You can find a list of upcoming programs on our website's events page at calendar.prattlibrary.org. If you type genealogy into the search bar, you can see what's coming up. A few that we have planned are: on September 9th, we'll be holding our third Genealogy Circle meeting of the year. I'll be presenting that, and the topic will be researching the history of your house. Please note, if you're interested in this topic, we'll be holding a workshop also on December 9th, where I will be available to work with you one-on-one to help you further your research. Please note that attendance at the September 9th workshop or at the December workshop will be very limited, so we can ensure that we are able to provide one-on-one help for everybody. And you must attend the program on September 9th as a prerequisite if you want to attend the workshop. So keep that in mind. You can find information about all of these programs and more online on our calendar of events, again, at calendar.prattlibrary.org. Again, just use the search feature to look for genealogy programs. And an extra note, we do also have programs about local history if you want to look for those too. And again, please do not forget to complete the evaluation following the program. We really would appreciate that. So with that, let me get started with the program. And I'm new to StreamYard, so give me a moment. I'll be sharing the screen. Okay. All right, so just making sure, can people see the screen? Sean, can you see the screen?
Yes, your screen is on share.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the slideshow is showing.
Slideshow is showing. You're ready to go.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. And there are going to be a few times when we're going to be navigating away from this slideshow to show you some things live on another website. So just heads up. Okay, so thank you for coming to my program, Using Land Records, your key to unlocking family history puzzles. And again, I'm Julie Saylor from the Maryland department at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have done some genealogy on my own family, but I don't really consider myself to be a genealogist. I've studied historic preservation, and I know a bit about land records searching from work that I've done in writing a National Register nomination for a Baltimore building. I've also helped many of our patrons research the history of their houses. So I've become a bit of a specialist in Maryland land records, but I haven't really used them to answer my own genealogical questions because almost all of my ancestors are not from Maryland. I'll start with some general information about the use of land records in genealogy, but we'll quickly get very specific with Maryland records. I find that patrons have the most trouble with tracing deeds, so I'm going to go into this in detail, and I'll trace a few deeds for you using different strategies. During this part of the program, I'll be stopping and encouraging you to ask questions. And again, you're welcome to ask questions at the end also. Use your chat box. No worries if you have ancestors that aren't from Maryland. You'll find that deeds are recorded and indexed pretty much the same way all over the United States. So you can take these skills to other places. So let's talk about why genealogists might want to learn about land records. Here's a statistic that might persuade you that land records are worth your time. Prior to the Civil War, more than 85% of white males owned property in the United States. Also, land records are useful just because they've been recorded for so long. In the case of Maryland, back to the 1600s. So what kind of information might you find in these records? Firstly, you can use land records to locate your ancestor in a specific place and a specific time period. Of course, you probably have used the census to do this, but the census only recorded the names of all household members as far back as 1850. If you know when an ancestor was alive and where they lived, you might be able to locate them by looking for a land record. Secondly, civil registration of deaths were not recorded earlier in the 19th century for many places in this country. Of course, church records may have been recorded further back in time. If land was being passed down as an inheritance, you may find the date of death of the owner. Thirdly, land records can give you an idea about family kinship. If the landowner was married, often you'll get the name of the wife. If the land was owned by an unmarried woman, this fact is often included in the record. And by the way, this is still true. If the land was being inherited, you can find the name of heirs and sometimes the names of their spouses. Most often, the heirs would be the children of the landowner. Even if you were not successful in finding a will for your ancestor, maybe you'll succeed in finding a land record to show that land was being passed down in the family and who that family was. Fourthly, while this may be an obvious thing, land records give the location of land your ancestor owned. You might want to go see the land or house where your ancestor lived. If some of you have Irish ancestry, you may have heard of a source called Griffith's Valuation, which is a 19th century listing of the value of land everywhere in Ireland. Using this source, I was able to find the townland of my ancestor and actually visit there. It's a pretty powerful experience to be in the same physical space as your ancestor. You can also use geography and even information about their neighbors that will give you a context and understanding more about your ancestor. Fifthly, land records are a source of information about real property. Slaves were considered to be real property before emancipation. You might find information about the sale of slaves in land records. You might also find information about manumission in land records. In Maryland, between 1752 and 1790, the deed was the only legal document that could free a slave. The Maryland State Archives has an index to these records. And then finally, even if you know a lot about your ancestor, land records will give you even more information about them. When you're looking, imagine why are they selling or buying land? People often buy or sell land at a significant time in their lives. And if you know something about your ancestor, you might be able to guess why. This might not make a lot of sense to you now, but I'm going to show you the land record of a notorious Marylander in the program and explain the significance of this transaction in the context of what was going on in his life. So next, I want to tell you about types of land records, but first, let's talk about the earliest land records in America. A person settling the land would have acquired it by getting a land grant. You may have seen the terms state land states and public land states with regard to these original land records. And you might also have seen the terms public land states and non-federal public land states in this context also. In the case of a state land state, an individual would get a land grant through the colonial or state government. Before the Revolution, these lands ultimately belonged to the king. Land acquired later, west of the Appalachian Mountains, belonged to the federal government and was divided into townships under the Land Ordinance of 1785. So if you're looking for these original land grants transferring land to your ancestor, you might be looking in either state or federal records. If you're looking for land grants in federal records, you'd be going to the National Archives for assistance. And it's actually a little more complicated than this. There are actually also hybrid states with regard to these original land records. Some types of land records were produced as part of the process of getting a land grant. Examples would be homestead applications and bounty land warrants. In the case of bounty land warrants, land would be granted to military veterans as a reward for military service. So you may have seen this database. You may have used it to look for Revolutionary War pension. Realize also that it has applications for bounty land warrants. Veterans from the American Revolution to the Mexican-American War were eligible to receive land from the United States government. And this is a database available through Ancestry, Library Edition, or Heritage Quest. The Homestead Act of 1862 was passed by President Lincoln as a way to encourage settlement in the Western United States. Homesteaders would receive 160 acres if they met certain conditions. If you're interested in finding these records, these are kept by the Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Department of the Interior. I believe you may also be able to search for these records through Ancestry and Family Search. As part of the land grant process, the land would be surveyed. Then a map would be produced showing the boundaries and major physical features of the land, such as rivers and creeks. These are called plat maps. There's actually another use for plat maps that we'll briefly be discussing later. Before we discuss Maryland land records, let me mention a few other kinds of land records you may consider in your genealogical research. You might find tax records relating to your ancestor. I've sometimes seen these on ancestry.com. You might also use land ownership, also called cadastral maps, to locate land your ancestor owned. The Library of Congress site, ancestry.com, public libraries, and historical societies are good places to find land ownership maps. So let's talk about original Maryland land records. Charles I of England granted a charter granting land to Cecil Calvert, Lord Baltimore, in 1632. So if a person wanted land in Maryland, they would go to the Lords Baltimore to get it. These were the original land grants, also known as patents. This page from the Maryland State Archives describes this process in detail and gives you links to the records associated with these patents. And by the way, as an aside, I'm talking about pre-revolutionary times, of course. If in your research travels, you hear that your ancestor may have had a land patent, you can try the Maryland State Archives first to see if you can find it. Follow some of the links on this page. Another good site to check for information about patents is a site called Maryland Historical Mapping. I found a patent for a tract of land in Baltimore called Mount Royal by using these sites. We'll be talking about Mount Royal later, by the way. You can also find some early land records at a Maryland site called plats.net. And here's the search page for Calvert County. I found a plat for a patent called Beveridge Deer Butte using this resource. There's even a little map of the patent here. By the way, patents sometimes have some pretty funny names. So you might enjoy browsing some of these sites just for fun to see how creative the names are. So once a person has been granted land in this way, they could pass it down to heirs or transfer it to other people. A deed is the instrument used in the transfer of real property. So I'm going to show you the nitty-gritty on how to trace deeds, but here's my disclaimer. I did not receive formal training in land records research. I learned everything the hard way, but you can learn a lot that way. And secondly, I am not a real estate attorney, but I'm happy to show you what I know. So when you buy a house or piece of land, you get a deed to the property, and that deed is recorded in county or city records. So how do you get at these records? In the olden days, you'd have to visit the courthouse to do this research. But in Maryland, you can do this almost entirely online. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about terminology and a few basic concepts. So a deed is a transaction involving the transfer of real property, usually between a seller and a buyer. Of course, there are other ways property is transferred, such as when a person dies and leaves it to an heir. The person transferring the property is called a grantor. The one receiving it is the grantee. So usually the grantor is the seller, and then usually a grantee would be the buyer. That's why I have that on the screen. In deed references, you may see the terms liber and folio. Liber is the same as book, and folio is the same as page. And the liber number is given first in a deed reference, and then the page or the folio number is the second number you're going to see in the deed reference. A clerk is a person who records the deeds, and often deed references contain the initials of the clerk. By the way, the owner of the property retains the original deed. What we'll be seeing is, in many cases, will be the clerk's copy of the original document. If it's handwritten, it will be a copy of what the clerk saw on the original deed. So earlier deeds will actually be secondary, not primary resources. For the most part, clerks were honorable public servants, but sometimes you'll find mistakes or omissions. And I have a little side story here to illustrate this. Here in Baltimore, we actually did have a shady land records clerk in the 1850s. His name was Edward Dowling. According to the Baltimore Sun, his land records were, and this is a quote, written with such bad ink and so pale that they were almost illegible, unquote. Some of the records had to be written again at the expense of about $5,000. That was probably a lot of money at that time. I actually stumbled across one of these deeds, and I don't think the Sun papers were exaggerating. This is what one of his deeds looked like. You can see it's very pale and is covered in ink blotches. Sadly, Mr. Dowling was removed from office in 1856 and sadly committed suicide in 1860. But I'm telling you this story to keep in mind that clerks were human. When you're examining a handwritten deed, keep this in mind. I don't think you'll see huge mistakes, but occasionally they are there. More modern deeds will be a typed copy or a photocopy of the original document. So that's a little bit of a different situation. By the way, there are different types of deeds, and we're going to see a few in the course of this program. Remember, we're looking at legal documents. And so if you don't understand terminology, you may want to spend time checking a law dictionary. But do realize legal terms changed over time. So if you're looking at an extremely old land record and you see a term you don't understand, you may want to look at a law dictionary published during the same time. A good online resource for you to consider is the Legal Genealogist blog by attorney Judy G. Russell. If you see a land records term you don't understand, you could try searching for that on her website. She also recommends the names of some older law dictionaries to use, and these can be found in the Internet Archives at archive.org. And this is actually one of my favorite sites for primary source materials of all kinds. So Bouvier's is a law dictionary recommended by Judy G. Russell. So I'm first going to show you how to use deed references to research the chain of title. This method involves tracing deeds back in time from the current owner, and it's useful in house history research. So you'll need to get started by finding a deed reference for the current owners of the property. And Maryland will do this by going to the Real Property Database for the Maryland Department of Assessment and Taxation. So you'll be going to their website at dat.maryland.gov. And if you see here on the left of the screen where it says Online Services, you're going to be clicking on Search the Real Property Database. You see that highlighted here. And then here is where you will be selecting the county and the search method to use. I think I'm going to be going to a line, well, not quite. I have a few more slides, and then we are going to a live screen. So you'll be selecting, in this case, we'll be choosing Baltimore City, and the search method we'll choose is the street address. Here you're just going to be typing in the street number, and then with the street name, you don't really, it works better if you don't use street suffixes, but actually I've also found that prefixes such as north and south also probably are not really great ways to search. It doesn't give you good results. So just put in the name of the street there. And let's see, we're going to go ahead and go to the live screen. And Sean, do we still see what's going on here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's DAT. I'm going to show you what the result of one of these searches looks like. I don't know why. I'm going to show you the other way to find this. All right, perfect. All right, so we're choosing the city, choosing our street address. This is a quirky website. You actually do have to click on next or it doesn't work. It's kind of quirky. Okay, so this is what a search result looks like. And this again is the current information about the owner of the property and the current deed. So here's what we need to be looking at, what you might want to jot down when you find the result of these searches. The deed reference, this is for the current deed on this property. The block number and the lot number. The block numbers are specific to the city. And we're going to talk about why block numbers are important later. And if you slide down the page here, you're going to see previous transfers of the property. And then here's some more deed references for those deed transfers. And we're going to be going now to another website for Maryland land records called mdlandrec.net. And that's this site right here. And by the way, in the resource list, we have lists of all these links, or I don't know if you want to take a screenshot of this. As you see, you do need to log in. It is free for anybody to get an account. So bear with me. I really think that showing this live is one of the best things that you can do. All right, I'm not going to do that. Okay. So now here, this is a drop-down menu. We're going to go ahead and choose Baltimore City. Okay, this is the Baltimore City search page. Every county in Maryland also has their own search pages. They do differ a little according to the kinds of records that they have available. So what we're going to be doing here is typing in the deed reference that we found on the SDAT real property page. And I'm going to type in the first number that we saw under book and the second number under page. So let's see. Using a borrowed computer, so my numbers are my old numbers that I searched for are not showing up. Okay, so this is a deed for the property, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you find in a deed. This is a transaction involving the transfer of real property, again, usually between a seller and a buyer. The one transferring the property is called a grantor, and the one receiving it is called the grantee. You see that right here in the language of the deed. You see the words grantor and grantee. This next paragraph talks about the amount of money that changed hands in this transaction. That's what consideration means. And the third paragraph, starting with beginning for the same on the southwest side of Rose Kemp Avenue, is called the physical description of the property. This is a description of its location relative to important landmarks such as streets. If you have a really old deed, physical descriptions might also be locating the property relative to landmarks such as trees, posts, and stones. I think that's because that's the way surveyors actually surveyed the properties. And you also see here a plat reference. You don't see that very often in deeds, but you do see that sometimes. For sure, you're going to want to be looking at that later, and we're going to see that plat later. Another thing about physical descriptions, you want to keep an eye on them as you're working backward. Sometimes land was acquired and added to the property being transferred. Other times, a larger piece of land might have been divided into smaller parcels. So as that would happen, you would see some kind of change in that physical description. The next paragraph mentions improvements. Improvements usually refer to a house or other structure. If you're tracing the chain of title for a Baltimore property, be aware that sometimes the land under the house may be owned by someone else and the homeowner may be paying ground rent. Sometimes you'll find land records in Baltimore which actually are simply transfers of land, not the house. So you want to read the description carefully. Very few places in America have ground rent. That's something that we inherited from England. So this next paragraph here talks about a previous transfer of the property on May 8th, 2006. And you see here a deed reference. So remember that, let's see here, Liber means book, folio means page, and then FMC, those are the initials of the clerk. The trace back, we're going to go right here where it says jump to new volume. Whoops. Let's see if it'll let me do that. And we're going to type in that information. Okay. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so here is the next deed. For this deed, the grantors are Carl Friedrich Hundert and Winfried Horst Hundert, and the grantee is Myers Benton, LLC. If you slide down the page, you're going to see another citation for an earlier deed right here. And so what we can do to trace back further is to click again here on Jump to New Volume and type that information in. Oops. It helps to type correctly. And go yet again. Okay, so here's a deed between Alvina Petrick and Margarita Hundert. And by the way, if you were reading the deeds, you would find out Margarita was Carl's wife. So this is one way to trace back deeds by using references to previous transactions. So, Sean, are you still there?
No, still here.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just pausing for a moment to ask if anybody has any questions. Maybe I need to hit escape so I can see. So this is a good moment to pause to see if there are questions. All right. So, oh, I see. We do have.
You could unshare your screen, Julie, in order to clear up the screen space if you want.
Okay. All right. So far, I don't see any comments here. So I guess I will continue, but you still do have chances to answer. Here, I'll go ahead and hit stop sharing for just a moment. Okay, well, I mean, I guess we can do that. Actually, do you mind holding that question until the end and we can try to find that at the end, if you don't mind, Mary Boston? We can try to look for that. Let me just jot down Mary Boston. And we can go ahead and go into Maryland Land Records and try that also. So let's go back to sharing our screen. And yeah, I mean, basically what you're going to be doing to find that deed is you'll be going to the Charles County page and then entering in that same information the way I showed you. But I can go ahead and do that at the end of the program, and we can all take a look at that. So we'll go back into our screen sharing right now. And so what I'm going to do now is, okay. So before I show you another method of tracing deeds, let me show you a plat. On Maryland Land Records, there is a link for plats.net. You can also go to that site directly by typing that in. Using this resource, I was able to find the plat for Rose Kemp Avenue. In the context of a city or county's development, a plat was a map that had to be submitted to the city or county before development could occur. It shows lot lines for the properties in this development. And by the way, you saw the lot number being mentioned in a physical description for this property. You would be able to locate that property on this plat. This plat was filed in 1905 by landowners David and Samuel Markley in Baltimore County. So sometimes tracing deeds back by using deed references is not going to work. I've learned this from bitter experience. Sometimes the clerk may have written down the reference wrong. Sometimes it's going to be illegible, or sometimes you might not find one at all. I'm going to show you how wrong things can go and how to work around it. And I feel this method is especially useful for genealogists. I once had a patron who wanted the original deed for a historic house in Baltimore known as the Mount Royal Mansion. That's what this picture is here. According to published sources, this house was built by physician Solomon Burkhead in 1785, or may have been built in 1792. These sources also say that the land was sold to Burkhead by Charles Carroll of Carrollton. That might be a name you know, because Carroll was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So can we find the original deed from Carroll to Burkhead? The current address of this house is 2001 Park Avenue. So we're going to take a look at the SDAT record for this house. I kind of have this in two screenshots. You can see here that there's no transfer information at all about this property, where it says deed reference, that's been left blank. And then other transfers also left blank. That's because this house has not changed hands in a long time. Actually, you see here, it is currently owned by the Mayor and City Council of Baltimore. Okay, so I decided to get clever and see if I could find a deed reference somewhere for the property and work from that. I managed to find a nomination for Mount Royal Mansion for the National Register of Historic Places. This is an application to have the building listed in the National Register. Nominations often have a detailed history of the building, which often includes a history of ownership. And this source gives a deed reference of JFC Liber 2146 Folio 109. You see that at the very bottom of this page in the screenshot. So we're going to go back to Maryland Land Records, and we're going to see what we can find using that citation. Let's go back. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the city search page again, just to be safe. And we're going to go to and click on go. Okay, so this is a deed. Let me, by the way, you can zoom in on this a little bit, and that might help out a little bit. This is a deed between Wheeler Holding and Peter G. Angelos. That might be another name that you recognize. He was the owner of the Baltimore Orioles. If you read this deed carefully, and when I say read carefully in the physical description, you see a reference to a deed of partition of Hugh Lennox of 1891. So I'm going to just sort of blow this up a little bit again so you can see this, zoom in. So it's between Hugh Lennox bond, and there's the date, and then here is the citation for that. So we're going to go ahead and click on jump to new volume, and we're going to have a look at that deed real quick, because obviously you see this here and it looks interesting, and why not look? 1, 3, 5, 6. Okay. Luckily, land records are working pretty fast today. So this is a deed of partition for Hugh Lennox Bond. This was once a very large property, and it was being split up into lots and distributed to various family members. That's why it's called a deed of partition. This deed is 55 pages long. most of it involving written descriptions of each lot that was being created by this document. I read through all 55 pages. Not an easy task. And what I did not find in this deed was a reference to an earlier deed. So as far as I was concerned, this was a brick wall. And for a person doing house history, this doesn't feel good. So for genealogists, though, this deed might look really great to you because there's a lot of information in here that you will be amazed at. For one thing, there's a list of family members in here and also the names of their spouses. It's sort of hard to see this because of this person's writing, but it's in there. There are also references to documents, basically court documents. Let me click on the next page. I hope you can see this. There's a reference to power of attorney, and there's also a reference to the will of Solomon Burkhead. And I think here's a power of attorney listed right here. And this right here is, yes, this is the reference to Solomon Burkhead's will. And by the way, this is findable in Ancestry, this particular will. I have found that. The end of this deed also shows family members who had the deed notarized in the state where they live. So I'm going to have to jump to a whole new page number to show you this. Like I said, it's a 55-page deed, so it is not short. So you see here where the deed was notarized in the state of Massachusetts, Middlesex County, and another notary notarizing this in Massachusetts and Suffolk County, and another one in Pennsylvania. So this is, a lot of these family members scattered to other states. And there are also names of witnesses here, and it's a big name of witnesses. It's pretty amazing. I'll go to a different page to show you that. So this is page 1 of all these witnesses. Here's page 2. So these are people that were either related to Hugh Lennox Bond or were part of his, what genealogists call his fan club. In other words, friends, neighbors, and associates. So these are people that potentially probably were in his inner circle. These are people that he trusted. So I think those are good people for you to know about when you're doing genealogy research. But now we're going to go on to figure out how to get past this brick wall. There are ways to search for land records if you know the names of the grantor or the grantee. And there has an obvious name. They're known as grantor-grantee indexes. All you need to know is the name of your ancestor and when they might have lived in a particular geographical location to use these. In Baltimore City, there's a little bit of a catch when you're using grantor-grantee indexes. Baltimore is a large city with a lot of land transactions, so the clerks recorded them according to geographical areas of the city called blocks. They're not the same as a city block. They're actually very small little chunks of the city. And then each of those blocks have their own books that where the clerks recorded the information. So remember that I showed you on the SDAT record where the block number can be found. For the Mount Royal Mansion, the block number is going to be 3448. And let's go to the Baltimore City search page again to show you how to get to the block books. We're going to click right here. We're going to be hoping to see records between around 1785 and 1792. And the older block books, you need to click right there. Click that. Okay, so you're going to see that the earliest records for this block is actually 1887. That is when this area was annexed to the city from Baltimore County. And by the way, the oldest block book records anywhere in Baltimore City are for 1851 when Baltimore became an independent city. Be aware, some of the counties in Maryland, some of the Maryland County boundaries also changed. So you may encounter a similar situation with very old records from other Maryland counties. So in this case, we want to see records older than 1887. So to go back further in time, we'll need to have a look at the Baltimore County search page. So we're going to do that right here. And this is the county search page. To get at these older records, we're going to need to click here where it says active indices. And you see right here, this is a drop-down menu. We're going to be looking at, you see here, grantee and grantor indexes from 1653 to 1849. I'm interested in seeing properties sold by Charles Carroll of Carrollton. So we're going to choose the grantor index right here. And you'll need to click on search. Okay, so you'll see here a range of years to select. I'm going to save you a little bit of pain and tell you that I already looked through 1787 to 1797 and I didn't see what I wanted. So I looked in this next group of records, 1798 to 1803. Okay. Okay, so this is what the first page looks like. We're going to skip on to the next page. And let me zoom in on this a little bit. So this is the first page of this index. These are for grantors with the last name starting with AB. So you see here in this column here, that's a grantor. Here's a grantee. This is a type of transaction. And then this is the location of the property. Here is the deed reference. But of course, we're looking for the name Carroll. Scrolling through page by page can be time consuming on this database. You can decide to download up to 10 pages at a time by typing in a range of pages. And another technique, which is a little bit more, I don't know, primitive or I don't know, creative, is maybe type in a page number to see where in the alphabet you land. And I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead, and I'm going to go to page 58 of this document to show you what I found. So we're going to be looking for a transaction between Charles Carroll of Carrollton and Solomon Burkhead. I'm going to try to make this easier for you to see. Okay, so here it is. This is Charles Carroll of Carrollton. I think that's an abbreviation. This is to Solomon Burkhead. The type of transaction is a deed. This is the location of the property. This actually says Part Ivy Hills, 92.5 acres. Here is a page number, which is 503. The book number, you need to slide up a little. You'll see that too, 65. If you slide up to the very top, you're going to also see the clerk's initials. So right now, we're just going to go ahead and jump to a new volume. And it's, I think we said 65. And hold on here. And we're going to click on go. So this is the original deed. I don't know. I think most of us can see this. This is pretty good writing. This is from February 1801, and it's the sale of a tract called Ivy Hills to Solomon Burkhead. So you might be wondering why secondary sources said the house was built in 1785 or 1792. I really don't have a good answer, but I did find an article discussing the Mount Royal place name by William B. Mary in the March 1959 Maryland Historical Magazine. He concluded that the Ivy Hill tract was the land where the Mount Royal mansion was built, and that Carroll sold the property to Burkhead in 1801. But we just found the same information by simply going to the grantor index. You may also have noticed the word indenture in this document. It's written right here, if you can see this. In this case, an indenture is a type of deed. An older law dictionary can give you more information about this legal term if you want to know more about that. By the way, we've also seen the original patent for the Mount Royal tract earlier in the program. And I've also found the surveyor's notes and plat for the same tract using plats.net. So potentially you can find a lot of information on one property. So we're going to go back to the slideshow. I assume I'm back in the slideshow. Okay. So we're going to have a peek at some more modern grantor grantee indexes. In some, you're going to see the property address right here under remarks. In other records, you may see an abbreviated physical description of the property instead of the address. That's what this is right here under this column called location of property. So this is another place where I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and ask if there are any other questions. Let's go to the StreamYard and see if we have more comments. Okay. All right. I have a few more questions here. Some people want to know if it's harder to find farmland records, such as the Eastern Shore of Maryland, Talbot County from 1800s to 1900s. In this case, really, the basic search technique is going to be the same. You're going to be looking in county records, and you're just going to be looking in grantor indexes under the name of your ancestor. It's not necessarily any different to look for farm property. Somebody wanted to know if a person rented land around 1800, how would you find that? Sometimes leases of land were also recorded in land records, so I would give it a try. I think there was a chance that you would find it. Somebody else is asking for a handout. I think that the state archives may have that kind of a handout about land record searching. If you want to send me your email address at the end of the program, or if you would like to, at the end of the program, I share my email address. I would say, why don't you go ahead and email me and I'll try to send you a scan of that handout, Michelle. And well, we kind of don't, like, given the amount of time that we have, I wish I could share more colonial examples. I mean, basically land records work the same. I mean, they work the same now as they did back in the day, except maybe for looking up land patents. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking me about. Okay, but anyway, that's sort of what I'm going to say. There was somebody earlier in the program that gave me a reference, and at the end of this program, we can go ahead and take a look for that. So if that's all the questions we have for now, let's go back into the slideshow. Okay. All right, go to entire screen. Okay. All right. So grantor and grantee indexes are set up pretty much the same way around the country. So if you have ancestors that are not from Maryland, take a look and see if you can find digitized land records for your ancestor's city or county. Here's a website covering land records for Salem, Massachusetts. And here's a page from the Grantor Grantee Index showing grantors named Marston, who are, at least some of the people on this page are my ancestors. I would have to sort that out, but for sure they are. Here's a page for Butler County, Ohio. Through this site, I was able to find a record showing when my mother's house was transferred to her after my father's death. They actually attached his death certificate to the record. That was kind of an unexpected find. So if you're searching for extremely old land records, you can even try Ancestry or Family Search to see if there's anything, or even the website of the local public library in the county or city your ancestor lived in. So earlier in the program, I mentioned I'd be showing you the land record of a notorious Marylander and show you how this person's land transaction makes sense in the context of his life. Think about it. Most likely land would be the biggest asset a person owned, so selling or transferring it would be a significant event in that person's life. So does anybody recognize this person? Well, this man is John H. Surratt, who was involved in the conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. As you may know, John Wilkes Booth was the person behind that conspiracy. Actually, Booth's first plan was to kidnap Lincoln so the president could be used as leverage to free prominent Confederate prisoners. So here's a timeline for John Surratt. Dr. Samuel Mudd first introduced Surratt to Booth on December 23rd, 1864. On January 18th, 1865, Booth and some accomplices tried to kidnap Lincoln at a performance at Ford's Theater. I don't believe Surratt was part of this attempt. Booth, Surratt, and some other conspirators, however, made another kidnap attempt on March the 17th at another theater performance at the General Campbell Hospital in Northwest Washington, D.C. Both of these attempts were unsuccessful because Lincoln decided not to attend either performance. Booth assassinated Lincoln on April 14th, 1865, and Surratt was an accomplice to the assassination. So I found out about Surratt's land transaction in the book American Brutus, John Wilkes Booth and the Lincoln Conspiracies by Michael W. Kaufman. And let me read a passage from this book. Booth knew the risks Surratt was taking when he joined the plot, so he gave him advice on how to avoid confiscation. Unquote. In other words, Booth wanted to help Surratt protect his property from being seized by the federal government if they were caught. So Surratt executed a quit-claim deed on January 3rd, 1865. And here's the deed. So what is a quit-claim deed? It might be easiest to understand if you consider the process that goes into most property sales. If you buy a house, you most likely will pay a title search company. They will trace the deed and make sure there are no other claims or liens that anyone may have on the property. According to Black's Law Dictionary, and this is a quote, a quitclaim deed is, quote, operating by way of release, that is, intended to pass any title, interest, or claim which the grantor may have in the premises, but not professing that such title is valid, nor containing any warranty or covenants for title, unquote. So this means the owner of the property was simply passing on what he or she had without proof that they had free and clear ownership of the property. So why would anyone want to do this? Well, if you're just passing land along to another family member, they may find this kind of deed sufficient for their purposes. It also might be a kind of transaction you might make if you were in a hurry. In this case, John Surratt was transferring property to his mother, Mary E. Surratt, which had previously been passed down to him by his father. To quote the beginning of this deed made this the 3rd of January in the year of our Lord, 1065 by me, John H. Surratt, now of Washington County in the District of Columbia, witnesseth that in consideration of the sum of $1,000 to me in hand, paid by my mother, Mary E. Surratt of the county aforesaid, and the further consideration of maternal love and affection for my said mother. So this is pretty remarkable language in a land record. I don't see many expressions of affection in deeds, although I have seen them once in a while. Later in the deed, he even released any interest he might have in equity or property in the future. The property he transferred also included the house she was living in. Surratt accepted a significant amount of money from his mother in consideration for the property he was giving her. If I didn't know who John Surratt was, I'd think maybe he was leaving town and not planning ever to come back. And you could say that's probably true. He expected to be a fugitive and certainly would have needed the money more than he needed this land. He probably expected his mother to survive him, and he didn't want the federal government seizing the family lands. If you consider the timeline, it's pretty remarkable that he executed this document only days after he met Booth. As you may already know, Mary E. Surratt was convicted of her part in the conspiracy by a military commission. She was the first woman executed by the federal government on July 7th, 1865. John Surratt fled the country and was eventually captured on a boat to Malta. In 1867, he was brought to trial in front of a civilian jury, which could not come to a verdict, so he was freed. But looking at this deed, things didn't turn out quite the way John Surratt thought they would. So you might think this use of a quitclaim deed was unique to John Surratt, and actually that's not true. Anthony Quinn Warner transferred the house he was living in to a woman living in Los Angeles 1 month before he bombed downtown Nashville on Christmas Day in 2020. That was done through a quitclaim deed. She didn't even know that he was transferring the house to her, by the way. Land records research can actually be useful to investigative journalists because the records are public and they can reveal information about prominent figures. This middle article was about Catherine Pugh of Baltimore, the mayor of Baltimore, who subsequently resigned because of this scandal. So I hope you're now convinced that land records are valuable tools in family history research. And so we can navigate away from this, and let's see if there are some more questions. Also, we will get to Mary Boston's land record. Let's go here. Go back to the StreamYard. All right. All right, so I see one extra question before we go to Mary's land record. All right, Barbara says she found a will from 1784 that leaves a farm in Frederick County to a son. Would the deceased be the grantor or the executors? Well, there probably would be like a statement in a deed about an executor, but I would think that you're going to, when you're looking for a deed, you're going to be looking in grantor, grantee type indexes. They're not indexed by executor. I would probably look under that person's name in the grantor index. Most likely it probably would be the deceased. I mean, I'm more or less assuming that the family members share the same last name. So that's how I think I would look for that. And I would look for a grantor index that covers, for that county, that covers that time period. I mean, I guess keep in mind too that the land may have been transferred possibly a little bit later than the time of the will or the time of death, but you want to look in that general time frame. I hope that answers your question. Let's have a look real quick. All right, I'm going to write down this person's land record. We have Charles County. This is Mary Boston's question. Charles County, Lieber G, and we have book. That's kind of odd, by the way, because really you're seeing 3 references there. All right, so let's go back to, we're going to share the screen again. And we're going to go back in the Maryland land records. Okay. And we need to go to Charles County. So let's see what happens. This is live research. It'll either work or it won't work. Okay. One method we can try is, it says Lieber G book 3. That's so odd. I'm going to try, this is really a guess because of the way that you've written out the citation. I don't know how this is going to work. So that's what we're trying first, is we're going to try the book 3, page 350. Well, I'm going to have to go back to StreamYard to look to see. Wait a minute. I see here. Again, all right, so we have G3 right here. I'm going to assume maybe this is it. Okay, let's see. Says an indenture. Does this look like it could be your person? Okay. This looks like it's the end of another deed. I'm going to assume that this must be it. At the request of Thomas Owen, the following deed was recorded the 30th day of June, Anno Domini 1759. This indenture made the 16th day of April in the year. Let's see. Between John Taylor Roby of Charles County. Let me go back to StreamYard. Mary, are you there? Is that the deed you were looking for, Mary Boston? I think I found your deed. Did you see that? Okay, I'm waiting to hear back from Mary. Are there any last questions, by the way? I'm happy to take. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, the way that was written out was a little confusing, but once you went into the website, it worked. Okay. So Bradley asked for more colonial examples. I'm going to go back into, sorry to be running back and forth on screen sharing. I don't know if this is going to help you or not. I'm going to try a couple things that I don't know. I'm kind of trying to guess what you mean by colonial examples. So we're going to start by looking at Maryland land records, just for the heck of it. It says that I'm okay. Okay, let's just. So one thing that you can do is for some of these older records, again, you can go to, and every county has a little bit different search page. In this case, to see really old records, you're going to active indices here, and we're going to click. And I mean, if you wanted to look at a really old grantor index, this would be the place to go. If you want to look at really old records, you could potentially choose like this first page, this first accession number here. And these are going to be really old records. It looks like this is written in by a clerk later in time, but this is the grantor index. So we have here, it looks like Matthew Adam, and it looks like the grantee is Jonathan Lincoln. And I'm just zooming in so you can see this a little better. And gosh, these are kind of hard to read, by the way. Some of these things are going to be hard to read. I'm not going to lie to you. I am not even sure what this says. But you would have to try to decipher what this number is here and then type in that folio, IS. I'm going to say this too. If you absolutely can't read something, this is another hint for everybody. If you absolutely cannot read a citation that you're seeing in a land record, and you go right here where it says send image feedback, and send them an email, and they will get back to you. It won't be instant, but they will get back to you. So this might not be the world's best example. Let's try Anne Arundel. We're playing around here for a little bit. I'm going to try this. Let's see. Usually that's where I go to find really old stuff. Okay. This says just land records index. Okay. So again, I mean, every county, the things are going to be a little bit differently recorded. You're really going to have to be kind of tolerant and just be willing to click on things and see what you see. Okay. Again, here's some very, this is not your world's best writing, but it looks to me like these are grantors and grantees. And then it looks like you're going to have some page numbers right here. Now, these are extremely old records. We're now looking in the 1600s. And if you just keep clicking on next, you're going to find that looks like it's just simply a reference to a deed. So, oh, it looks like this could be JH number 2, maybe. I don't know. Why don't we play? I'm just going to try JH right here. And, or it could be 2. And let's look up this first page number here, which is page 25. We're just randomly choosing something and see if it works. All right, well, was it JH 20? Let's see here. Let's go back and look at that. We may have to go back. It looks like it says JH number 2. I don't know if people agree with that. That's, whoops. We're going to go to, let's try JH as a clerk's initials. It may or may not work. You see that this can get a little complicated. And again, gotta tell everybody the truth here. This is how things work with these very, very old records. It can be a challenge. I'm just going to go back into this index and we'll just take another look again. Could randomly choose some other ones and see what happens here. Looks like it's all the same person's writing, although it does look like it says WF number 1 right here. And this is a deed number 118. I don't know. And that's 1699 to 1702. So this is pretty old. Let's try book 1 because I'm not sure we can read the clerk's writing. See what happens. And this has also resulted in, we're going to try, could be WT1. Okay, well, that did it. Okay, now we have a really hyper old land record from, this is WT1, page 118. That definitely is a land record that was referred to on that index. So this sort of gives you an idea about how to move around in these things. The other thing that I'm thinking about that maybe you were asking me for is the Maryland State Archives. No, we'll go back into that patent page. Let's see here. Let's see if this is the, no. We're going to go back to, okay, this is what I want to look at. The patents index. This is another thing that you can use also. Let's see if we can get that to work right now. And I'm just going to randomly select something. So here are land patents. And you can actually, it says here that there's a PDF available for this person. So if you want to click on that, this is like a card file. And you can find out the name of the tract and find the patent that way. And then you're going to have to do a little bit of searching in the Maryland State Archives site to see if there's any way you can actually get this patent. But these are the citations for that. The other thing that you can do is go in the Maryland Land, the Maryland Historical Mapping site that I talked about earlier, and see if you can't find it there as well. But this is an index to all the land patents that are starting with the grantor. Well, the grantee, I guess, would be people with the last name starting with B. So that is another way. So let me go back in the StreamYard. Are there any further questions? Yeah, someone is trying to help me out there. IH. Yeah, and can I do Pennsylvania? I do not know what Pennsylvania records look like at all. If you want to email me, I don't know. We can look at that question later, but off the top of my head, I've never searched Pennsylvania records. One comment I'm going to say is this, from having looked at a few other states' land records, Maryland, we are a very lucky state. Almost everything has been digitized and is very searchable. And in many states, I've discovered that it's done by county. So you're going to need to figure out what county that place was in Pennsylvania. I mean, I can try to help you, but I can't really guarantee you that I'll get results. If that doesn't work, maybe contact the Free Library of Philadelphia and see if there's somebody there that knows anything about that. So how are we doing on time? Is there any last questions? Last call. And by the way, Bradley, I'm not 100% sure I helped you that much, but at least I showed you a little bit about navigating around these sites and what you're going to have to do in order to do that research. Yeah, Liberty County. So you really are going to need to be looking for land records for Liberty County, Pennsylvania, or see if Pennsylvania has a land records site. Again, I have not done any research in Pennsylvania land records. And I don't know anything about Mason-Dixon monuments. Again, that's something I know very little about. If you wanted to email me with that question, I don't know if that's in land records or not. Is there any very last questions here? I'm going to put in the, let's see, am I able to, I don't know if this is going to have to be put into the, I don't know that I myself can comment. Sean, I'm going to put in.
What are you looking to comment?
I just want to really put in our email address in case people want to email. So I'm sending that.
If you put it into the, okay, I see.
Yeah, if you want to push that into the comments so that anybody with any lingering questions who wants me to get back to them, they can send me an email. And then also one very, very last reminder. Okay, great. Thank you. Yep. One very, very last reminder before I sign off. September the 9th, we're doing a house history research program. And if you think that you would like additional help researching your house, and that workshop will be in December, then you're going to not want to miss that particular presentation. So again, that's on September the 9th. So with that, I think I'll be signing off. But again, feel free to email me with your questions. And that's it. Bye, everybody.